8 days from demonstrating the power of the vote in this country. And so it is a particular honor for those of us at the Lincoln Project to be able to share this conversation with some of the leading voices in our country on voting, participation, and particularly within the African American community. This evening is fairly straightforward. We've got two panels that will be held this evening. The first will be on the Black voter as a block, how that plays itself out, what it means in this upcoming election. And our second panel will be on overcoming voter suppression in 2020. In our first panel, we're going to have a great team of folks. Marc Morial will be with us, president of the National Urban League, Tara Setmayer, journalist and political leader and senior advisor with us at the Lincoln Project, Michael Singleton, who's also political advisor and all around strategic thinker in the political space, and Bakari Sellers, Democratic political strategist, will be a part of our first panel. Our second panel will invite Derrick Johnson, president of the NAACP, Adrianne Shropshire, executive director of the BlackPAC, Doc Rivers, whom we all know as coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, and of course, David Clooney, who is the executive director of BEA, the Black Economic Alliance. So we've got a full slate of folks. We've got a great team of people who are going to share some particular insights for you this evening. So let's begin the conversation to wet your whistle a little bit with this video.
The men who followed this flag 150 years ago knew what it meant. Treason against their country, the death of the United States. America defeated the men who followed that flag. Those with honor surrendered and cast it aside forever. So why does it keep showing up today at events supporting Donald Trump? And why does he call the folks who carry it very fine people?
I think there's blame on both sides, but you also had people that were very fine people.
What does it say that they're all in for Trump? What does it say that he won't condemn a flag of hate, division, and losers? For us, it says this is a time for choosing America or Trump.
This is a time for choosing. This is a time where all of us have to bring ourselves to some truths and realities about what this election means, not just for the country, but for our communities in particular. And this is, I think, specifically and very important for the African-American community, and to help us sort of understand exactly how the Black community is looking at this election and what it may mean for them as they have been casting their votes and will continue to cast their votes right through November 3rd. I'm very happy and pleased to welcome Terrence Woodbury, who is the partner of HIT Strategies. And his team have been putting together an incredible analysis of the Black vote, where it is, and they're going to be releasing their findings on Black voters that include information about not just how we make up the majority of voters in places like Mississippi and Georgia, and almost a majority in South Carolina, but how this plays itself out relative to battleground states and the strategy that, quite honestly, the president has employed in trying to lure Black men into voting for him. So Terrence, welcome. And I turn the floor to you to share your insights from the hard and strategic work you guys have been doing over at HIT Strategies.
Thank you so much, Michael. I mean, we're in the final stretch, folks, and it's getting exciting. I'm very, very honored to have been able to go through the journey of this cycle with so many folks on this call, to be able to connect Black voters to their power, with BEA, with BlackPAC, with NAACP. I mean, we have some mighty, mighty powerful leaders on the front line of this. And because of their work, we've been able to really deep dive into the Black community to understand their priorities, their attitudes, their behavior in this cycle in a way that stretches beyond the limitations of most research, that stretches beyond Black voters as a single column, or even less than that as a POC column of a crosstab, but to really go into the nuance of Black voters, the diversity of Black voters. And that's really what we've been able to uncover here with so many of our research partners. So I'm honored to be here, and thank you all so much. I'm Terrence Woodbury. I'm a partner at HIT Strategies, along with my partner, Roshni Narangadi. We focus on a few important audiences here, on women and millennials and minorities, what we consider the ascending electorate, where all of the change, all of the rapid urgency and change is happening amongst these three audiences. And I can tell you right now, there's nowhere where the urgency is as great and where the need is as urgent as the Black community. And we see that every day, folks, in early vote. We see it in Georgia and in Texas and in Virginia. I like to joke around a little bit and say, you know, Donald Trump may have been more successful had he just disenfranchised Black voters privately, the way Republicans normally do. But once he got on that podium and started announcing to Black voters that their votes weren't going to be counted, that the post office was dismantling machines, I can tell you guys, Black voters are showing up in a way, and I think that that we are really, really about to determine the outcome of this election. And I just want to talk you through a few trends and research that we've been seeing here. So Black voters make up 13% of the national electorate, up from 11.5 in just 2000. And I can tell you now, like, Black voters are not, the fact that Black voters' share of the electorate is increasing is less of a result of Black voters' share of the population increasing, and more of a result of Black voters' share of the electorate, share of the people who actually turn out to cast their votes. And that, I believe, is going to increase even more this year. I just heard a very, very fascinating statistic out of Georgia. Black voters in Georgia, Black seniors, Black voters over the age of 65 in Georgia have already cast more votes than they did in 2016. Black seniors in Georgia have already cast more votes than they did in the entire cycle in 2016. I can tell you right now, Black seniors are my favorite voters in the electorate because we know how they're going to vote, and we know that they're going to vote. And so I think that tells us something about what to expect from Georgia, and I believe that this is the year that we could actually flip Georgia. 29 to 40% of Black voters between the ages of 24 and 39, Black voters between the ages of 24 and 39 make up 29 to 40% of Democratic voters in the 9 battleground states are Black voters. And this is important because we have some interesting races here in 3 of the battlegrounds. I like to talk about the reverse migration of Black voters. In South Carolina, in Georgia, and Mississippi, Black voters are almost the majority of the Democratic electorate. And in all 3 of these states, we have an opportunity to send 3 Black men to the Senate. This is a story that is not just a story of South Carolina and Georgia and Mississippi. This is a story that matters to Black men in Detroit. This is a story that matters to Black men in Philadelphia. You know, every day I get to sit in focus groups with Black men who feel like they are not represented in either party. They're not represented in the political system. And so to be able to talk about the Black men that we have the opportunity to send to the US Senate, this is a story that will mobilize Black voters, not just in South Carolina, Georgia, and Mississippi. This is a story that we have the opportunity to mobilize Black voters across the country. And the example that I often give is, you know, AOC does not just represent progressive left of New York. She represents the progressive left of Texas and the progressive left of Arizona and the progressive left of Colorado. There are young people all over the country that believe that AOC is the only person that represents them in Congress. And that is exactly what these three Black men have the opportunity to do for Black voters all across the country. And what's so important about that is that in South Carolina and Georgia and Mississippi, Black voters are almost the majority of all Democratic votes. In Georgia and look, in Mississippi, 71% of all Democratic votes come from Black people. In Georgia, 58% of all Democratic votes come from Black voters. And in South Carolina, 43% of all Democratic votes come from Black voters. So these are the kind of numbers that have the opportunity to empower and mobilize Black voters. And Black voters really do believe that they have the power to make a difference. This is a question we've been asking because there's a direct correlation between turnout and vote likelihood and the power that you perceive your vote to have to make a difference. And so the more power that you perceive your vote to have, the more likely you are to vote, which is why with BEA and BlackPAC and NAACP, our goal has not been just to increase likelihood to turn out. Our goal has been to increase the perception of power that Black people believe that they have to make a difference in their communities. And we see here that 56% of Black voters feel extremely powerful to make a difference in their community. 55% of Black men and even 48% of younger voters, Black voters under the age of 50. And so this has to be our charge, and our final argument is not just to increase the likelihood that they tell people like me, pollsters, that they are likely to turn out, but that we increase the power that they perceive in their vote, because we're going to need that power beyond Election Day. We're going to need that power on November 4th. We have to re-engage them and keep them engaged for what is likely to be a very uncertain and unprecedented election. And finally, Black voters have a few very important priorities. You know, pollsters often ask issue priorities, and most pollsters don't include racism as a part of their issue priorities. But one thing we wanted to do with BEA was go beyond just economic priorities, just jobs or wages, but to really understand what are the economic priorities of Black voters that will mobilize them. And we gave them a list and allowed them to pick at least 3 options out of that list. And for Black voters, the economic priorities are affordable healthcare, investing in programs that reduce and limit poverty, and the elimination of racial and ethnic employment discrimination. Overwhelmingly, Black voters are facing this election with anxiety. This is not just a COVID election for Black voters. And I want to be clear, the top 2 issues for Black voters often rotate as often as we ask this question, and we ask it at least 10 times every month. It rotates between racism and COVID-19. We know that COVID is affecting Black voters in a disproportionate way that is not affecting the rest of the country. But we also know that racism is a large umbrella for a lot of issues, for economic issues, for environmental justice, for the disproportionate impacts of COVID and other health impacts. And so this is an opportunity for us to lean into this election, but we have to lean in to race. As the president has declared a culture war, we have to lean in and give Black voters a place to land in this culture war. This poll was conducted between September 16th and September 26th. It included a sample of 1,500 Black voters across North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Georgia, what I believe are going to be 3 of the most hotly contested battleground states of this cycle. And we also included a couple of other statistics here from exit polls, Pew Research, the New York Times, And I'm sure we will have more time to talk through a lot of this data before this conversation is over.
Terrence, thank you very much, man. It's incredible insight into how Black voters are beginning to synthesize this election and what issues are moving them, and the fact that it's incumbent on candidates, whether they're running for local office or national office, to begin to focus on these types of issues in a significant way. Appreciate your taking the time to share that information. And this is going to be released and on the street, as they say, tomorrow, or it's out there now, or where can people find it?
This has been released to the media today. It's going live tomorrow. Please access this information, utilize this information. There's a lot of content here that will tell us exactly how to mobilize Black voters and how do we make our closing argument in the last 7 days of this election.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you, Terrence. Quick little ad for you guys. Chew on this for a little bit.
Before Donald Trump comes to Tulsa, remember what real leaders sound like.
Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice.
Too often we honor swagger and bluster and the wielders of force. Too often we excuse those who are willing to build their own lives on the shattered dreams of other human beings.
Now those who divide speak.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
I agree that looters ought to be shot, yes. On sight? On sight. The Negro and white citizen of this state are against the breakdown of law and order.
You have to dominate the streets. Please don't be too nice. Very fine people on both sides.
When you hear leaders speak, you know who they are, who they represent, and what kind of America they'll create. The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
It's important to know what kind of America our leaders will create for us, and it's important to know the role that we have in creating that. So with that in mind, I'd like to bring our first panel in. Very, very much looking forward to this conversation. Marc Morial, president of the National Urban League, a leader and a powerful voice for the Black community, particularly in the economic space. Tara Setmayer, senior advisor here at the Lincoln Project, also political analyst for CNN, as well as a political advisor on a number of campaigns over the past few years. Shermichael Singleton, political consultant and strategist as well. And of course, Bakari Sellers, Democratic political strategist, who's involved in a number of national campaigns. Folks, welcome and thank you so much for participating. Marc, I want to start with you.
Yeah,
brother,
good to be with you.
Absolutely. You have had an enormous ability to sort of connect the dots, the economic and the social, the political and the community pieces that sort of evolve around how we move forward as, successfully economically. The Urban League has been around for 110 years. You guys have really kind of created that arc for Black engagement. How do you assess this election, particularly in light of the evidence that Mr. Woodbury put on the table for Black voters? What is the connection we should be making as we wind down these last 8 days?
So first of all, let me thank the Black Economic Alliance and David Clooney, and certainly you, Michael, Mr. Chairman, for your long friendship and our association. To the other panelists, to the other people who have joined together to bring people this Black Coalition Town Hall. Let me put it succinctly. Black voters and Black people are enraged and outraged in a way that the only time I've seen this is when David Duke was running for governor of Louisiana back in 1991. The outrage and the repulsion is real, it's visceral, and it's motivating. This year, the prospect of COVID, the disparities in deaths and infections, the George Floyd killing on the streets of Minneapolis have simply added to this outrage. So the determination to be heard, the determination to vote is as powerful as I've seen it. I also think that an additional motivating factor, and some of these ads we saw captured it, is the sense that the vote itself is under attack. The post office is under attack. Voter suppression is widespread. The Russians and the Iranians are fooling around, trying to manipulate psychologically the American electorate, targeting African-American voters. The community is woke and woker than woke. And I believe that's motivating people to want to vote. We have a campaign called Reclaim Your Vote that's working in approximately 6 states with emphasis, but all across our network of some 36 states and 90 affiliate sites. And that is just one of, Michael, an unprecedented number of get out the vote efforts that are not being run by political parties, not being run by political candidates, but are being run by community-based groups and public housing groups and returning citizens and civic organizations and churches and social. People have decided to pick up. We picked up our own rake. We picked up our own hoe. We picked up our own shovel. And we're going to be heard in this election. And that's what I sense. The Urban League movement, our leaders at the local level, our young professionals, all of our volunteers, they are highly motivated. They are working around the clock to send a very powerful message. And I think in this context, I saw a different type of motivation in 2008. It was the motivation to make history. It was not a motivation. It was not a motivation of enragement and outrage. Mm-hmm. This is a motivation compelled by enragement and outrage at what people are experiencing and what they see and what they feel from the leadership of this nation.
Bakari, I want to pick up on that point because I think it's significant on a number of levels. You've talked about racism as a system that has corrupted policing, for example, and needs to be deconstructed. How does that part of the narrative play itself out on the heels of the murder of George Floyd, for example, and the response by the current administration and the response by Joe Biden, who's looking to become the next president? How should Black folks be assessing that right now in terms of what it may mean when we're looking at race and politics and the election of a president?
So first of all, thank you for having me a part of this August body. Tara and Mark, even Shermichael. No, it's a pleasure to be here with all of my friends, and to be with you, Michael. It's just an awesome opportunity. Thank you so much. Look, I'm gonna start off by quoting Stokely Carmichael, right? And he said that if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. But if you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. Mm. Racism in this country is a power construct. It's not somebody calling you nigger. That's ignorance. Racism is instead ingrained in the systems, right? We're talking about systemic oppression. We're talking about institutionalized racism. We're talking about the fact that Flint still doesn't have clean water, but there are 100 cities like Flint that are in the same situation with not even having potable water. We're talking about Black children who are growing up in communities where they're punished because of the zip code they're born into. We're talking about these poor rural Black and brown communities in South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, that because these southern states didn't expand Medicaid, have been losing their hospitals and their access to quality care. So these are the systems that we're talking about. And it was just so encapsulated in that 8 minutes and 46 seconds. You know, Al Sharpton said it best. I had never seen one person give so many eulogies in 1 week, but Al Sharpton gave about 15 eulogies in that week. But he was so sharp that he was talking about taking your knee off of our neck. And it was so pervasive, and it was so powerful because it talked about all of these systems where Black folk in this country feel as if there is a knee on our neck. Now, there is a direct connection, and there's some people on this call who are older than I, but there's a direct connection and a direct corollary between the plight of Emmett Till and Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor. There's a direct correlation between the 16th Street Baptist Church and Mother Emanuel AME these are stories that are not new or unique to this time frame. We just have camera phones now so we can see them. But to be Black in this country has been a perpetual state of grieving. And you're starting to see that same energy that Marc Morial was talking about. That same energy is just catapulting people to the polls and taking Black people to the polls. It's an emotion. It's a Fannie Lou Hamer sick and tired of being sick and tired. And the last thing that I'll point out is Woodbury's analysis was so on point, because for far too long, white folk, particularly, and it's on both sides, liberals and progressives, liberals and conservatives, for far too long have been only talking to Black folk about criminal justice reform, right?
Yes.
Like that's all we care about. And it's very clear that the Trump administration, they only see us through two lenses. One is criminality, the other is suppression, right? Either they criminals or we're gonna keep them from getting to the polls. Those are the only two lenses. And we have to have a full conversation, particularly with younger Black voters, talking to their whole selves. And so I think, and I applaud all the groups that come together tonight so we can talk about Black voters in their whole selves and bringing them to the polls.
So you read my mind, brother, because I just, that segue to the young voter, because that seems to be such an incredibly important linchpin in this election. A lot of folks generally discounting the youth vote in their participation, but particularly the Black youth. Sure, Michael, I've heard you talk passionately as a young Black man about the power of the vote beyond your political affiliation, beyond the politics. You talk about it in the sense of empowerment and ownership. You talk about it as from a perspective of, we're getting something here. The future's right here in our hands, and we have to be a part of shaping it. How does that play out particularly for young folks who are watching this now, may watch it later, and are sitting there thinking, man, this voting shit ain't it's cracked up to be. I don't know, why bother? You seem to come at it from a different perspective. What would you say, and how do you connect the dots that Bakari just laid out there for a lot of young voters?
Right. I mean, Chairman Still, it's interesting because as I made a lot of notes about Terrence's analysis, he said 48% of young African Americans believe or feel extremely empowered right now. My question is, where's the other percent? What's their perceptions about this particular moment? And of that 48%, yeah, they feel extremely empowered, but do they actually realize or understand how to utilize the power that they feel they have beyond marching, beyond the vote? What comes next? That's always my question. After the election is settled, the person you voted for is in. What's next? Do we maintain that level of activism? Do we maintain holding those individuals accountable, or do we move on with our lives? And I've always been of the opinion that we don't have the ability to sort of be idle. When I think about African Americans from education, I think about home ownership, particularly for my group being a millennial. My brief time at HUD, one of the biggest concerns I had was home ownership for younger African Americans, which we know is the leeway into building wealth, sustainable wealth that can then in turn be passed on to generations. I started thinking about, well, how can I help my generation get to that point? I started thinking about education and access to education, right? We know more African American women and men alike are getting college education, but they spend 30 years, 40 years paying off that college debt. If you're spending so much time paying off debt, do you ever have the opportunity to build wealth when you start a family? Will you have the opportunity to potentially put your kids through school? And so when I think about the political climate right now, what I would like to see, what I think is so important beyond this election for some of the groups that have been so engaged in targeting young millennials, Black millennials in particular, is trying to keep us abreast of every single step policy-wise that occurs once we move beyond the voting. And how can we maintain our activism to continue to sort of be a nuisance, if you will, to hold politicians' feet to the fire to say, we gave you our vote. Now we want to hold you accountable. Here are the things that we would like to see that benefits us specifically. And if you don't meet those demands, then we will vote you out for someone else. And I think that is just so pivotal, because if not, then I think Chairman Stewart will see is we'll vote someone in office and 4 years will pass by, potentially 8 years. And then people will say, I still feel disenfranchised. I don't feel much has happened to me. When I go home, for example, to my hometown of New Orleans, I talk to regular people there, regular people in my family, and they say, yeah, I vote, but nothing changes. I don't see anything around me getting better. I don't necessarily see my kids being better off. I don't see new jobs coming into my community. I still see the policing issue as maintaining the same level as it was before, perhaps with some changes here or there. Overall, I don't see my life being better. That has to change. And I think for millennial African Americans right now, we want that to change. The question is, how do you sustain our focus, if you will? And I think if we can figure that out, then I believe we can start to see some long-term progress that becomes sustainable for us and even our kids. Yet keep in mind, a lot of us are having children. I'm getting ready to have a kid in another year or two. I think about this all the time as I think about marriage with my girlfriend. And we talk, well, what are things going to look like 5 or 10 years from now when our kids begin to get older? Those are all questions that we're thinking about, and I don't have an answer for it, and that's a problem.
Tara, you've got now the nexus of engagement, voter engagement. You've got the underlying race issues and tensions that derive from that. You've got what Michael was just talking about in terms of younger voters kind of looking at this and kind of going, I don't know if I want to be a part of that, or if I'm really it's a part of me. How do you assess the Black vote right now? We hear this all the time. Oh, it's not a monolithic vote, but yet it votes very heavily Democratic. As it noted, it once voted very heavily Republican. All right, up until that change in the late 30s and right through the 1960s, where you had that transition from Republican to Democrat. But we do tend to sort of stay with the team, if you will, through thick or thin, ride or die. Is that a good thing? What's behind that? And does it serve the ultimate purpose to at least, rhetorically not be monolithic, but the vote translates somewhat that way at times?
Michael, this is an issue that we as conservatives for years would bring up, that, what is happening, that the Black vote is so tilted one way. Where did we go wrong? Why isn't our messaging getting through? And I can tell you that this whole nightmare of the last 5 or 6 years, culminating with the Trump presidency, has really opened my eyes as to why that is. And what we're seeing now is a reckoning. There is a racial reckoning happening in this country in a way that I don't think would have happened if it weren't for the Trump presidency. Mm-hmm. Because now, I get it, why certain constituencies within the Black community were unwilling to listen to what we had to say as conservatives, coming out and saying, listen, economically, this is what we believe in. Jack Kemp preached ladders of opportunity. That's what we want to create. We can't guarantee outcomes. We want to guarantee equality to access, right? All of those things were getting lost in the shuffle because of so many of the other underhanded things that were going on, and a lack of an acknowledgement of the systemic problems institutionally that are still in existence. And what we're seeing right now in the areas of health disparities with COVID and the failed response, a lot of people in white America had no idea about that, about the way that the health disparities impact minority communities. They don't think about it. Now it's in their face, and Black folks are saying, we've been trying to tell you. The same thing when it comes to the economics and the disadvantages that a lot of Black businesses have, and Michael brought up the topic of wealth and ownership. During the Bush years, that was one of the things that we pushed big time, was home ownership and investing in small businesses. We saw minority-owned businesses thrive until the financial crisis. But the point was that administration recognized that's how you build wealth, is through ownership. You don't hear that in this administration, to Bakari's point. This administration only looks at people of color through criminality, criminal justice reform. You should thank me because I let some of y'all out of prison. Really? Jared Kushner today and his ignorant comments about, we can put our policies out there, but but Black folks, we can't make them want to be successful. I mean, that shows you everything you need to know about the way that the environment we're in is perceiving people of color. And then, of course, you have the issue of systemic racism in policing and the criminal justice system, and what we've seen, this incredible movement with the Black Lives Matter movement. That is another thing that has awakened people who had no idea that it was as serious as it is. I'm thrilled that Doc Rivers is on this program with us. You'll hear from him later on. We share the coming from a law enforcement family background and having to face what's going on and be honest about what's happening within our police departments. My husband is a federal law enforcement officer. He's a Black man. My grandfather was a police officer in New Jersey for 40 years. I bleed blue. I grew up in a law enforcement household, but it's time that we have to start acknowledging what's going on here. And all of these things, we are now as a country acknowledging it. So how do we change the messaging? That's been the issue. How do we get people involved? You tell them, listen, think about all the people who stayed home in 2016 in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, in Detroit, in Michigan, in Philly, in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump only won by 77,000 votes. That's 11,000 votes in Michigan. That's less than an NBA basketball game. 44,000 votes in Pennsylvania. That's less than a Penn State football game. Okay, that seats 100,000 people. In Milwaukee, 23,000 votes. That's it. And you talk to people and say, if you complain, like to Shermichael's point, well, we vote, nothing happens. Well, guess what happens when you don't vote? You get what you have now. And it's important for people to realize that we have to put it in plain language, giving examples of this is what is impacted when you're not involved. And I think the more that we do that and make it relatable, then people wake up. That's why you see people getting up at 4 a.m. to go vote. That's why you see this historic, unbelievable voter participation now, which I'm thrilled to see, because people have had enough. We've had civil rights icons pass away in the last year and who were stalwarts, and people are waking up and realizing that it was off their backs that we are here today with the power to do what we do. Those legacies matter, and it's been passed now on to us. So I think that the more that we acknowledge the mistakes of the past, acknowledge what's happening now, we can no longer turn a blind eye to the systemic problems that we face and remind people what happens when you don't get involved. I think that that's where we start.
So Bakari, to that point, what do you tell folks in our community, regardless of age, background, demographics, whatever, who don't see the connection between their vote and the things that matter to them in their everyday lives? What do we say to them? How do we help make that connection?
See, that's a good question, because I love the way you framed it, because we've been talking too damn much. Like, it's time that we listen to these folk. And my liberal colleagues, sometimes we get in these ivory towers and tell people what they need and how we think they should operate and what we think they should do. I've been spending a lot of time with Black male groups. I was at a barbershop in Monroe, did the same thing in Greensboro and Raleigh. I was supposed to go down to Tampa this weekend, but they pulled it down due to COVID, and just an opportunity to listen. When you're in these shops, just listening to the pain that a lot of these individuals are going through and the fact that they don't think anybody's done anything to lessen their plight, right? And, when you just go in and listen, first thing, they're just happy somebody actually came without just telling them what to do, but actually listening to how they've been toiling in the vineyard for so long, right? And I think that that's the first step. I said it earlier, it bears repeating, don't nobody want to hear who died for this right to vote no more. That don't work. I mean, as my father, I see everything through the prism of the movement. He was in SNCC, he got shot. That's how I see things. But for a younger generation of voter, that doesn't move them anymore. They want to know, talking to David Clooney over the BEA, they want to know about economic opportunities at the SBA. They all know about Robert Smith and Treasury. They all want to have these dreams for their family being able to thrive. Black voters are tired of trying to survive. We want to have an opportunity to thrive in this country. And the difference between Jared Kushner and the rest of us is that our parents didn't have an opportunity to give us $10 million worth of property when we were 19 years old, because they were busy fighting so that we could actually survive in this country. They were pouring out their blood, their sweat, their tears. We are still one generation away from people who know what the smell of gun smoke smells like, laying on jailhouse floors. And so I think that it's necessary for people like us who have these opportunities to begin listening more. I think that's the number one thing we can do.
Marc, I want to give you the last word as we round out this panel, because I think Bakari has just set the opportunity and the conundrum for the 21st century. Dr. King, looking out at that crowd and said, talking about, his dream, wasn't just talking to the folks who were standing in front of him. He was talking to Bakari, and he was talking to Bakari's children and their children. How do, given the venerable institutions like the NAACP, like Urban League, how do we create that bridge to what Bakari said, that the old narrative, and I use that with affection, the term old, that narrative doesn't move the generations now the way it moved my parents and even moved me as a young man. How do you see that?
So I'll add some historical context, because today's young African American has come of age in the 21st century. So they've come of age with the Great Recession, which started 12 years ago. They came of age with Obama and the Tea Party, and they came of age in the era of Trump and Trumpism and white supremacy. And they've seen no results. No results. If there's a new regime, if there's a new opportunity for a new thrust in this country, a new leadership thrust, that leadership thrust is going to have to be one that is focused on getting results, on changing the arc, on economic inequality, and changing the arc when it comes to health, in creating meaningful Black economic opportunity. And that will be the clarion call. And with people in this process of being enraged, and in this year of 2020, protesting and now voting in record numbers, can't go to sleep. We can't go retreat to the grandstands, become spectators and watch and say, now we've done our job. We've got to, one, keep the pressure on. We, number two, have to keep the pressure on in support of those things that might be proposed and those things that we want. We want a new Voting Rights Act. We want a plan to end Black wealth. We want a commission on reparations. We want serious money to be put to end, if you will, the inequities in funding of education. There are absolute things that we want that are part of an agenda. And that's where my voice is going to be. And I think the voice of many of us. But look, the historic civil rights organizations, no one should believe that the historic civil rights organizations believe we own exclusively the leadership of any movement. The most refreshing thing that's happened in the last half a dozen years has been the rise of a more activist, if you will, group of young leaders. The Black Lives Matter movement, new elected officials at the local level. I welcome that. I think it is positive, but now we have to consolidate, because it's going to be about the agenda and about results. Last thing I'll say, as an elected official, a local elected official, I got the opportunity to change the arc of my city on police reform, on jobs, on economic empowerment. And one of the things I don't want people to leave this conversation without understanding, it's not just about the presidency. It's not just about who's in the Senate and who's in the Congress. Crucially important, it's about those mayors. It's about those city council members. It's about those state legislators. It's about people who really impact day-to-day issues. So focus and accountability needs to be there as well as at the top.
Marc Morial, Tara Setmayer, Shermichael Singleton, Bakari Sellers, thank you so much for taking a moment to share your insights of the power of the Black vote as we are 8 days away from electing a new president that will set the stage for what happens next. And I'm so glad you took the time to be a part of this conversation right now. Before we move into our next panel, we got a little something to share with you. It's called Doc.
It's just so sad. Just watching the Republican convention and Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. All you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing to me why we keep loving this country and this country does not love us back. We protest and they send riot guards, right? We're trying to get them to protect us, just like they protect everybody else. You don't need to be Black to be outraged. You need to be American and outraged. And how dare the Republicans talk about fear? What white father has to give his son a talk about being careful if you get pulled over? All we're asking is you live up to the Constitution for everybody. Thank you.
Powerful, powerful. And with that, I'd like to welcome to moderate our second panel, my buddy and friend and I should say co-worker, David Clooney, who is the Executive Director of the Black Economic Alliance. David, take it away.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to everybody for being here this evening. This is really a special gathering of different organizations all aligned on a cause of getting Black folks more engaged in the process of voting. I'm proud that the Black Economic Alliance PAC put out the data that we did earlier today that we heard from Terrence on, and it was really to demonstrate what our power is when we show up and when we are engaged. And it's my pleasure to walk through this with partners of ours, Derrick Johnson at the NAACP, Adrianne Shropshire at BlackPAC, and Doc Rivers. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And we saw your words there, and I'll say, you know, as a Black man who, in my 40 years, despite my education and my professional achievements, understand exactly what you were talking about as somebody who's been stopped, frisked, fit the description of somebody who's committed a crime 7 times, handcuffed, arrested, guns drawn, knee and back, not neck, but same difference. I understand, and every Black man I know understands, most Black people I know understand. Put that comment in context for the cheap seats, if you will, and really what it means in this moment as we're having this reckoning on race and we're having this moment in America right now. How is what you were talking about, which I felt at such a visceral level, and I think it resonated with so many people because even folks who didn't have those experiences I just described did understand why you were so emotional, but put in context what you were talking about and how this discussion is relevant.
Yeah, it's a thank you, number one, to everyone. This is an amazing panel. The knowledge that has been bestowed on me in the last 30, 40 minutes has been unbelievable. And we keep learning, like we don't stop learning. And you know, it's interesting that day, we had a game. It's funny how times change. I was the Clipper coach, now I'm the 76ers coach in that quick of a time. And they wanted me to say something before the game, and I emotionally couldn't. I could not. And the reason I couldn't is because the one thing I do believe is that we can march and we can protest, but we can still work and we can be effective in work. And I thought that if I talked before the game, I wouldn't be able to do my job that night. So I had to wait until after the game. And then after the game, it wasn't anything said, it came pouring out. The frustrating thing for all of us, all right? Just turn on TV and go to an old rerun. And Sanford and Son, I'm gonna use that as an example. I was recently watching it, and Lamont tells Fred to stop eating meat. It can give you a heart attack. And Fred Sanford said, wow, I thought the #1 killer of Black men were the police. Now that was in 1972, and we're still talking about it. And so when you hear me speak, it's that frustration. You know, my dad was a cop. right? And the fact that my dad was a police officer and had to give me the speech is deep. It tells us that things are wrong. It tells us that the people who are doing the wrong know things are wrong, and yet it hasn't been fixed. This movement is different. The best part of this movement of late is that it's young. And us old folk like me, and I told all my coaches, it's time for us to do the listening and do the supporting. Because if we can get our Black youth involved, it's not just for this election, it's forever. And the power does shift, you know. The one thing we have to fight is that I don't want to get involved in politics. We have to fight that with our Black brethren. We do. You know, politics are not something that ever does anything for me. And the point I'm making to everyone that I can speak to is politics a part of your life, your daily life. Everything you do involves politics. So either you're going to get involved with it, or it's just going to keep controlling you. And then you're just going to sit back and complain about it. So it's not like it's chosen that we want to be involved. We need to be involved. We have to be involved. We do need a reckoning, and this is a reckoning. But we have a long way to go. You go to Germany, and there's no swastikas. It's illegal to have a swastika in Germany. There's markers on all the Holocaust homes. They have had a reckoning with they did something wrong. They're paying billions of dollars to the state of Israel because of the Holocaust. You know, the difference is for us, we are still living in the place where it happened. And so there's never been a reckoning. The economic outfalls of slavery still has us where we're at. And so that's what was pouring out that day to me. I think it needed to be said, and I think it needs to keep being said.
I appreciate that. And you know, there's a saying that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Black folks have been on the menu for over 400 years, and it is absolutely our time that we take our place at the table. That's one of the organizing principles of the Black Economic Alliance. And I'm going to turn to Adrianne in a second. But to your point on Sanford and Son, I think one of the most frustrating things is that we're having the same conversations we've been having over and over. I had the pleasure with a number of folks on this panel of speaking at the March on Washington this year, the 57th anniversary back in August. And you look back to 1963, it was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. If you look at just the Black-white home ownership gap, for example, it's wider now than it was in 1963. We're asking for the same things 57 years later. And it is.
Having said that, though, that's government. You know, we keep thinking that it's just people outside, right? Outside the government. These are government regulations that have hurt us from buying homes, that have not allowed us. The police are some of the people they have used to block polling places for voter suppression. So it's not that it's just people. It's part of our government that has done this. And so, yeah, we want to be at the table, but we have to create change. We've been talking for a long time, and we have to create change. Like, okay, let's get Joe Biden elected, all right? But once he gets elected, we still have to create change. That doesn't change with him winning and Kamala going into office. We have to demand change, and we have to stay at the table. I think it's too often we leave the table.
Absolutely. And that's what all of our organizations are about. And that's a perfect segue to Adrianne, who, you know, similar to the Black Economic Alliance, BlackPAC is a new kid on the block, if you will. You know, that we don't have the 100+ year history of achievement and advocacy for our community that the NAACP or the National Urban League do. But tell us a little bit about what caused you to found BlackPAC and what was the need for the organization and what work are you focused on, particularly in this moment?
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate Doc's comments, because they really are a reflection in many ways of how BlackPAC came into existence. And while we are, we're 4 years old, although the last 4 years have made me feel like I am 100 years old, the sort of impetus behind it was to answer some of the questions actually the doc just raised. Not a question around what does the political infrastructure in our communities look like? How do we take what we have and build upon that? This question of how do we start a conversation with people in our community about why it's okay to talk about politics, why it's okay to be explicitly engaged in politics. And, the sort of question about how do we, and this is, I think, was Michael's point in the earlier panel, how do we make sure that people understand the importance of elections, engage in elections, that we, talk to people during elections, help them understand what's at stake and who the candidates are, but then be very clear about the fact that our civic engagement, our political engagement, our activism can't end on election day. That it actually has to carry over, not just to the next day, but to the subsequent days, because that's the time when policy decisions start to be made about the very things that were raised inside or during the election, during the campaign. And that it really is part of our civic duty to ensure that the people that we elect into office actually make good on the promises that they made during the election. And so those were the questions that we were trying to answer. And it was a set of, BlackPAC really came about out of a community conversation. Derrick was a part of it. Terrence was a part of it. That fundamentally was about what are the gaps in our political infrastructure? What do we need when we think about, and really this was trying to imagine what we might need in a post-Obama era. After the first Black president and his 2 campaigns and his 2 terms, when we peeled back the layers of all of that, what existed? What did we need to build up? What did we need to create that might be new, out of whole cloth? And the thing that sort of emerged from our partners across the country, both local groups and state groups and some of the national organizations, was that it was important for us to have a political organization that was explicitly political, that could provide some, common utilities, right, to all of the partners that we have across the country. So whether that's research, whether that's weighing in and running large-scale program to make sure that our communities have the information that they need and that they're mobilized to the polls, that was sort of the role that we thought that we could play. And then in addition to that, sort of making sure that the people that we're engaging during election time, when we have the ability to scale up really big, that we make sure that those folks continue to be engaged either directly with us or with our partners on the ground, so that when decisions are being made in state legislatures or city councils, that they're in those places too, that they don't just sit home and sort of abdicate power to those people who they elect, but they actually hold on to the power that they have during elections and make sure that we see the kinds of policy outcomes that we know that we all are working so hard to achieve.
Appreciate that. And Derrick, my brother, thank you so much for being here. You have been in this game a long time individually. The NAACP, we can see it over your shoulder, has been in this game over 100 years. And you have seen a lot in terms of turning out Black voters. And I'm interested to hear, which you may be a little frozen, so I may have to come back to you, but I'm interested to hear, to the extent you can hear me right now. Let's start there. Can you hear me right now, Derrick? All right, we're gonna come back to Derrick. We lost Derrick.
Oh yeah, so I froze right on cue, right?
There he is. All right, good to have you. Welcome back. Right. So I was asking you, you've been in this game a long time. You've been turning out Black voters a long time. Talk about what the NAACP is doing, with your 100+ year infrastructure and inroads to local communities around the country to turn out Black voters. But importantly, what's different about this year as compared to so many years past where you've probably used a similar playbook previously, but I feel like everything about 2020 has required innovative thinking. And I think we just also have a different moment with race right now. So interested to hear the NAACP's approach, and particularly how you put it in context of this year and this moment we're in.
Right. Thank you, David, for the opportunity. Let me start by saying legacy does not mean effectiveness. And so when I took this position 3 years ago, I recognized that the NAACP needed massive retooling, particularly in the areas of civic engagement. Understanding that civic engagement should not be seen as an election transaction, but it's the arc of democracy. And so from day one, I began to look at, with the infrastructure we had in place, what was missing? What was missing was a data analysis, a metrically driven program that's outcome driven and not process driven. Very similar to Adrianne, and she and I have known each other a long time. We as African Americans, particularly that play in the electoral space, of engagement space, there are a lot of people who rush to the front of the line to talk about the analysis or talk about what the demands are, but there are not enough people who are doing the grind work to really touch voters in a way that's both scientific and consistent. And so for me with NAACP, first we partnered with a data science team. Secondly, we began to pilot and test what could actually be effective this election cycle and what was learned from 2016. And then out of that, build out a strategy, not only looking at 2020, but we looked at 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, redistricting, 2022, right back to midterm elections. And so that's the arc of democracy. And we will recalibrate that as long as I'm in this position on 5 years run. What we learned in 2016 was truly the power of social media and how it could drive a narrative that's counterproductive to our community, and how many in our community would buy into and pick up the narrative, which is one of the reasons why we launched the Stop Hate for Profit campaign along with Color of Change and ADL, because the power of Facebook would have had a much more disastrous impact on this election cycle if we didn't continuously have a spotlight on how they were allowing both domestic and foreign interests to try to sway the narrative. Secondly, it is about targeting. Where are the areas where African Americans can actually impact the outcome of the election? And so we break that out to 12 target states. The part of that is also doing an analysis of who else is playing in the space and how do we leverage the support of one another, and how do we do it in a way we're not overlapping with one another. Social justice is not a competition. It's an opportunity for us to advance an agenda, and in this case, advance an opportunity to win this election, however we define win. And we're very clear, winning is when the Black community and the vote can influence the outcome of the election so it can better reflect the needs and interests of our community. So when I look at Detroit, my hometown, in this moment, we have daily check-ins. Right now, we on pace in Detroit for a 50% turnout. That's not enough. In 2008, it was 53%. In 2016, it was 48%. So we got to bump it up. In Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, we're now concerned with the seating of Amy Barrett on the Supreme Court. What we're going to be looking at is the Republicans have already filed to go back to the Supreme Court to cut off the return of the ballots on election day, and not the 3 days that was won 10 days ago. So now we have to go up online and on commercials to say to people, don't mail your ballots, get them into the box. Looking at Texas and what is happening right now in Harris County, making sure that there is clarity about what the possibilities will be in South Carolina, going state by state, and then going deep. What can our units add to the value? And in some areas, having a real hard conversation. Are our local volunteers the right people to move the needle, or do we need to enlist another layer of support to move the needle? And then finally, David, and you was a part of the training we did for the Divine Nine. How do we support, even if it's back office in our traditional Black institutions that will be there regardless of funding, so they can show up with the level of strength that they have the capacity to do so? So we built out the data technology that if anyone sign up, we can give you the 20 names who live in your communities for you to contact with their information. And today we've had 197,000 people to sign up in the target areas where we can actually move the needle. Legacy does not mean effectiveness, but we have to be looking towards outcome as opposed to outputs.
I appreciate that. So Adrianne, back to you on Black BlackPAC conducted a poll of Black voters earlier this year that showed that Black voters were generally engaged, but also dissatisfied with the country, that the direction that the country was headed in, and also showed that they were generally warm to the Democratic Party as a bloc, but that they also felt very strongly that the Democratic Party wasn't doing enough for them. So with that backdrop and with everything we've discussed, how do you make the case to Black voters to get engaged? The same question that went to some of the folks on the first panel. So much of what we hear is my vote doesn't matter. Why do I get engaged? I don't see it in my daily life. How do you make that case from the BlackPAC perspective?
Yeah, I really appreciated some of Bakari's comments, including the one about Black people being able to bring their whole selves into this arena. And that is, I mean, when we sit in focus groups with Black voters, when we talk to people on the doors, part of what we hear is, so the work in some ways is being done for us in this moment, right? One of the things that is obviously clear is that people are struggling, people are suffering, whether it's as a result of the COVID crisis on people's health, or the COVID crisis on people's economic conditions, right? Whether it's people are experiencing directly or indirectly the impacts of racialized violence. Folks are pretty clear about whose doorstep that all sits at in this moment. So that is, the conditions are actually helping to clarify for people what's important in this moment. And the sort of reality outside of that, though, is that people have real material needs that are often not met. And this is sort of my point earlier about, we talk about things during campaigns, but they don't necessarily get implemented, acted on, or acted on to the degree that people need them to be transformative. And it isn't like people don't recognize that. And so part of our conversation with voters is one about the immediacy of this moment, about what is at stake right now. There's also the question about our role and sort of galvanizing and building the power of our community to not just make demands, but to be active participants in the change that we're seeking. One of the things that we've been talking to people about is, we're not looking for saviors. We're not looking to elect saviors. Right, we're looking to elect allies who are going to work with our community to make the change that's necessary. We're really clear about what's needed. We know what the problems are. We know what the priorities are, and we even have some ideas, right, about how to solve the problems that face our community. Part of our job is to work with people to understand that there is a place and there is a role for them to be engaged, and whether that's through their local organizations that they get involved with, whether that's through deciding that they are going to run for office. It is so heartening over the last couple of cycles to see how many Black people have simply just stepped into the gap and said, I am going to run for office. I will be the person that will go into the fray and work to move the kinds of issues and move the agenda that our community needs moved. But people, we have to be very mindful of the fact that people's lived experience can't just be washed away with campaign ads, right? They can't just be washed away with Facebook ads. People are very clear about whether or not their life is better, right? From 4 years or 6 years or 8 years, actually. We talk to a lot of young people, and this is, I think we were talking a little bit at the beginning, that we talk to a lot of young people who are really struggling to understand why this matters. Someone asked in one of the questions, how do we get young people to understand the power of their vote? They understand the power of their vote. They're very clear about the power of their vote, which is why they withhold it, right? It's why when young people say, I'm gonna, in 2016, I'm gonna cast this protest vote for a third party candidate. They weren't doing that willy-nilly. They were very clear about what they were doing. It's our job, right, to talk to them about how we collectivize our power and how we direct it in such a way that it actually gets our community what we need, but that also helps to, I think people are very committed to and understand the sort of ideals and the values of this country. People believe in fairness and equality, right? If there are any people who believe in the ideals of this country, it's us. And so there is a way that we actually talk to people about those. We started last year this thing called Black Citizenship in Action. And the entire purpose of the project was to have a conversation with grassroots folks, with activists about what it means to be a Black citizen in this country, to understand the history, the fight that it took to arrive at citizenship, how we continue to fight for our citizenship, but also most importantly, what happens when we embrace our citizenship, the role that Black people have played in this country when we wrap our arms around the notion of citizenship and we act on it. And those have been the most transformative times in this nation's history. So we try to have that conversation with folks. Who are we? And what is it that we are forcing to the surface? And what are the transformative ideas that we bring to the table and cause this country to embrace as its own? And so those are some of the conversations. And then there's just some real, again, material things that have to happen. People cannot just suffer economically. People cannot constantly be concerned about their children's education. People cannot constantly be concerned about whether or not, if they walk out on the street, whether it's a police officer or it's a white supremacist, that somehow they are in danger. And we've seen this uptick in people being very concerned about hate crimes. We have to address those issues in real fundamental and systemic ways. Otherwise, the question of what does it matter remains real for people. So we have to show and deliver on actual transformation and actual reforms that help people to see that there is a path forward if they participate in our politics.
Absolutely. And Doc, I want to give you the last word, but before I do, I want to ask Derrick a quick but important question about voter suppression. We talk about voter suppression often in the past as if it is a relic of the past. And we know it is very real, it is very present. Enemies, foreign and domestic, are targeting the Black community in particular, and they certainly understand the power of the Black vote. And I think particularly since the Shelby County v. Holder decision, essentially decommissioning Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, we have seen just an onslaught of state-sponsored, in many cases, but just widespread voter suppression, and it is disproportionately, like so many other things, impacted the Black community. So interested in your perspective on what voter suppression looks like in 2020, and importantly, how you talk to voters about not being deterred by voter suppression and making sure that they go prepared, like people have been doing at the polls this year so well, to overcome any obstacles that are put in their way.
So vote suppression exists, we know it. Tomorrow will mark 1 week before the election. One thing that I've always recognized in campaigns, we got to give people messages of hope. We have to lean in on the surplus narrative as opposed to the deficit narrative. And the best way you address vote suppression is overwhelm the system with votes, legitimate votes. And so you encourage people to go vote. Now, it exists. We know they're going to change polling places, times. Any number of things is going to take place to stack the court. So if anything go before the court, they knock it out. But 7 days prior to the election, we need to start talking about how we're going to overcome all forms of suppression and how we're going to win. Because hope messages for the African-American community, actually for progressives, is the winning strategy. And if you look at hope messages, it's typically in 5 words or less. Yes, we can. But if we don't have a hope message, the message of fear supersedes that. Make America great again. And I'm with her. That's not a hope message, make America great again. What's the fear message that superseded? So 7 days out, I'm resisting talk about vote suppression by only saying we got to overwhelm the system with as many votes as we possibly can. So the any suppressive methods that are being carried out, it becomes de minimis to the outcome. This game is a game of inches. It's a power game. It's a numbers game. And there are no one else we're going to persuade to vote one way or the other. This is all about getting everybody out to the polls that we can between now and the close of the polling place. November 3rd is the end of the election cycle. We must push people out with a hope message that this is our elections to win. And we also need to move away from the Black male narrative. 89% vote from any constituency group is a hell of a vote. you're going to have 11%, 12% of people who do something different. So I don't even want to talk about that anymore. Let's talk about how we're going to win so people can understand the value of their vote, and their vote is what's going to determine what type of society we're going to live in. One that looks towards 2030, or one that's going to be more like 1950.
Absolutely right. And I'll go one step further and say, I think one of the things we've seen is long lines and underfunding of the administration of voting. And I'll do like Michelle Obama did over the summer and say, bring your chair, bring a jacket, bring some comfortable shoes, bring lunch.
That's right.
And I've been so inspired by seeing people wait in line for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours. You should not have to do that in the United States in what we say is a democracy. But I so appreciate seeing people out there, and they are determined, and they will continue to be determined between now and, like you said, Derrick, the end of voting on November 3rd to make sure their vote is counted by any means necessary. So Doc, I want to give you the last word here. And race is not new to the NBA. It is not new to sports. You were coach of the Clippers back in 2014 when we had the really ugly Donald Sterling incident where we heard on tape, and it needed to be on tape, just like a lot of these police shootings need to be on tape, but we heard it.
Amen.
Just racist comments being spewed by someone who ostensibly was a friend of the Black community before that because he knew so many Black folks and was around so many Black folks. And, I've been really inspired also by the response of the NBA players, coaches, the administration, and you all have really set I think an example of how different people can use their platforms in creative and innovative ways to make sure we are having a conversation where we no longer accept the status quo. But at the same time, this year has been unprecedented in how many NBA players have registered to vote. I was appalled to hear how many were not registered to vote.
Me too. Yeah.
But you all are again leading the way. So I'm interested in how you talk to, be it NBA players or other people you come across who clearly still have the mentality that my vote doesn't matter, and that things are just going to continue to be the same because we keep having the same conversations. What is your message of motivation to them, and why is this time different?
Well, a couple things, and Derrick, I want to hit on one of the things you said. The Make America Great part, we're all for. It was the again part that scared the hell out of us, and so Make America Great should be our campaign. And fairness and equality is what we've all, Black people, we understand what fairness and equality is because we want it and we fight for it. Our problem is we got to get everyone to understand by giving us fairness and equality, you're not giving up anything. I think there's been this narrative that to give everyone equality, you have to give up something. No, you don't. You don't have to give up anything. You just have to make it equal. That's why sports works. It really does, because there's a clock and there's a score, and the best man's going to win. That's why when you go to a relay race or a race and you see Usain Bolt at the start, no one gets a 10. You don't get a 10-yard head start. It starts at 0, and the first guy that crosses wins. That's fairness and that's equality. So, the thing with our players, one of the things I challenged our players on, I asked my players, how many of you voted in the last election? One person raised their hand. That was back in 2016. I asked that question. I challenged my guys to vote. 2 more voted. So of the 17 players, only 3 voted. This year, we stopped playing basketball to talk about social injustice. And I was one of the guys that had the honor of being in front of all those players. And I asked them to raise their hands. Who have registered to vote? And as you found out and know, of the whatever 300 people, it was probably 10%. The best part of the entire bubble for me, other than the Clippers not winning and me getting fired because the Clippers didn't win, that was the worst part. The best part about the bubble for me was this. By the time we left, about 90% of the players had registered to vote. That was an actual change. They actually talked it, and then they did something about it. They're working polling places. They use their power to open up arenas. For the first time in their lives, they actually see their power and they're using it, and it's a beautiful thing. But we all have to lead and we all have to follow. You know, I tell my players that all the time. You know, a lot of people don't want to lead, but if you don't want to lead, allow someone to follow. And usually when you decide to follow someone, you end up leading. That's just the way the world works. You really do. You start leading someone else. And that's exactly what we have to do. I have a saying, and we have to do this all together. If you want to go quickly, you do it alone. But if you want to go far, you'll do it together. We all have to do it together.
Absolutely. Perfect message to end on. Thank you all so much, Adrianne, Derrick, Doc, all of the panelists this evening. This has been a really special collection of folks and a really important discussion at an important time. And let me say to the Lincoln Project, particularly the founders, Steve Schmidt, Mike, Reed, and others, this is the kind of coming together that we need. And a point of personal privilege, Michael, Steele, and Tara, and a number of other folks, Bakari and Michael, and Steve Schmidt, all of whom are advisory board members of the Black Economic Alliance. This is what we need to be doing together, is bringing people from different perspectives together who care about a common cause. In this case, that common cause is Black people. And it is changing the status quo and changing the narrative of what our power is when we engage in this democracy in a way that we never have. So I'm so happy that we were able to have this conversation tonight. I look forward to continuing this conversation. As we've talked about, the real work starts the day after the election, because we have a lot more to do in the way of engagement and demanding completely different set of outcomes for Black folks. And at BEA, we're focused on doing that in economic terms, and all of us across the board are focused on doing that for every issue that impacts Black folks. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Michael Steele to take us home.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. What a great panel. I really do appreciate the voices that we've heard. And more importantly, I appreciate all of you taking the time to share in this conversation and hopefully take something away from it that you can pay forward as you engage the community that you live in to vote. So on behalf of the Lincoln Project, I absolutely want to thank and am so grateful to our partners, the NAACP, BlackPAC, the Black Economic Alliance, and David and his leadership there. It's a real honor to work with you on that effort, and the National Urban League for helping us pull this together. We love to continue the conversation. We'd love to get your feedback, obviously. You know, you can follow us on Twitter at Project Lincoln. Certainly check out what we've got going on our website, www.lincolnproject.us. But more importantly, if you take nothing away from this conversation, take this. This is a transformative moment because you have a power that was given to us in our Constitution and our founding documents. And that is the power that's founded in liberty and freedom that is recognized and executed on by the vote. Folks, don't waste it. I get the politics and I get how you feel sometimes. And this candidate doesn't meet that standard and that candidate doesn't do it for me. I get it. But right now, the only thing that's important is this country. The only thing that matters is what Wednesday morning looks like, what Thursday after that looks like, and what the weeks and months after that look like. And you will set the pace and the tone for what comes next. This election is about us, all of us, every last single friggin' one of us. We don't get to sit this one out. We don't get to pretend someone else is carrying our vote this time. We don't get to think about the future. You need to act on it right now through your vote. And when you go vote, plan to vote. I know the lines are long and I know a lot of issues going on out there. Plan to vote, plan to stay engaged, and don't you dare back off the line you're in when you're there to vote. No one can pull you out of that line. There's not a poll watcher on this planet that can take that vote away from you. And speaking of poll watchers, if they're not registered with the county and they're not registered with the state board, they ain't a poll watcher. All right? Know what rights you have. And be prepared to go out there and execute that right when you vote. So thank you guys so much for taking a moment to be a part of this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you at the ballot box. Good night.